Welcome to the JBoard YouTube channel. In this episode, I was joined by Morgan Lobb, the founder and CEO of Vercida, one of the UK's most successful diversity-focused job boards. From working at Monster and Fish for Jobs to having a 2 a.m. light bulb moment that led to launching Vercida, Morgan has built a multi-million-pound business that not only connects diverse talent with inclusive employers, but also challenges the way that companies think about hiring. In this conversation, we dive into his journey, the challenges of bootstrapping a niche job board, and his ambitious plans for the future. Let's get into it. Morgan Lobb, thank you very much for joining me today.
Nice to join you.
Good stuff. So, can you tell me a bit about your background and what led you to start your job board?
Yeah, so my background originally was on the fringe of recruitment. Many years ago, I was supplying a service to recruitment agencies where I would supply them with leads. And that led to a interview with monster.com, which was my first entry point into the kind of digital online recruitment space. Worked at Monster for about 4 years, was probably employee number 10 in the London office when they came over to the UK, back in the times where employers would say, well, our staff wouldn't use a job board, so why should we buy off you? We use recruitment agencies successfully, only to see the job board market just completely explode. It was kind of like the dot-com bubble of the world at that time. You know, everyone wearing cargo pants and shorts and T-shirts to work. Thought we were really cool. Then after about 2 years, turning over loads of money, and everyone had to wear suits suddenly. Went through Monster very successfully. Really kind of enjoyed the time there and got the bug for that part of the industry. And then some of the main staff, the senior leadership team, went off and were poached to go off and work at Fish for Jobs. And I was asked to go and work there. So I left Monster, went and joined Fish for, worked there for a while. And then realised that if I could sell Fish for Jobs, I could sell anything. It was an inferior site. There was no two ways about it.
Yeah.
But still managed to get the sales in. So that kind of led to my experience and I guess confidence in the market that I could probably lend myself to most things within that space. And then I actually went traveling for a year.
Mm-hmm.
So I left the UK, went traveling, cultured myself, came back vowing to never go back into the recruitment industry, only for no one to want to give me a job because I was from the recruitment industry. And then I went and worked for an American firm called The Ladders, which was kind of an executive hire, and did that for a number of months before I actually lost my job. But that was sort of an interesting rise into the world of online recruitment.
Yeah. So when did you start Vercida then?
Well, I started Vercida in January 2011, just after the birth of my daughter, actually. And I found myself without a job. I was still in my probationary period at The Ladders and needed time actually to look after my daughter for personal reasons. And at that point, I wasn't given the grace of, extra time off. So I found myself in a position where I had a new child, a partner that wasn't very well, a mortgage to pay, and no work. And that was the sort of defining moment of, well, what do I do? Do I go and work for another corporate in the sector, or do I do something myself? I'd done something myself many years before, and but I didn't really have any sort of direction in that. And just at that time when I was at The Ladders, I was actually doing some work with the British Standards Institution. They were introducing a new online standard, BS 8878, which was about online accessibility. And I was part of a task force, and Reed were there, and Monster and CV Library and various others. But at that point, people didn't want to address the sort of lack of accessibility. At the same time, my best man was living with me 3 days a week, renting a room, coming home in the evenings quite upset because he couldn't come out to his team at work. He's gay. And it was kind of rattling around, this whole thing about online accessibility, LGBT at work. It was really annoying for me because I was just like, I really felt for my friend. And it was a bit like, how dare they make him feel this way?
Mm.
Martin, I literally had a 2 o'clock in the morning diversity jobs moment. Thought, wow, this is something that could work. And I ran downstairs and I Googled it, and there was sort of a shell of a site up. It was a really bad site, and I just thought I could do something with this. So that was back in 2011. And then literally the next day, I managed to find the person who owned the URL, said to them, I think I could do something with this. Why don't we do something in partnership? And the answer was, okay, yeah, fine. It's more of a cottage industry for me. You go at it and we'll split the revenues. And so I did exactly that. I tore down the site. I actually went to Robbie Cowling at JobServe,
Mm-hmm.
and he, being the good man he is, actually gave me a gecko site from Hot Lizard because he had just bought the company and they produced a white label job board. And he said, "Look, if you give me a split of the profits, I'll give you a site for free." And that was it. I built the first iteration of the site, diversityjobs.co.uk, as it was back then.
Yeah.
And I just got on the phones, and that was kind of how it started.
Nice. And so that was 14 years ago now,
Yeah.
almost. And lots changed in the world. We've gone through lots of kind of iterations from technology. As you said, the name change as well from you. Obviously, from a diversity perspective, we've gone through cycles of from what I've seen anyway, cycles of differing views and acceptances on diversity and what have you. And obviously, we won't talk about what's going on right now in terms of that across the world, but it'd be interesting to hear from you around kind of what over those last 13, 14 years, what have been your key milestones, your key achievements, what's some of the biggest successes that you've had with the job board?
Yeah, so I think in the early days, it was the main motivation was, look, if I can just survive and make enough money to support my family and not have to worry about the man letting me go or making me redundant, then I could be self-sufficient, then that's enough. Back then, it was around, if I could make 40, 50,000 pounds a year, then that was it. I didn't really think beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And getting on the phones, I made, in my first month, I made a couple of sales, and it was like 20k. It was two £10,000 sales. I was like, oh my God, look at this. I'm going to be rich. Actually, this is beyond my wildest dreams, only to then not make another sale for about 6 months. But it gave me enough runway
Yeah.
to realise that there was merit in it and people would buy it. And if I had the right story, then I could work it out. So I think initially it was about survival.
Mm-hmm.
It then became more of an interest around moving from the job board world into what is the world of inclusion.
Yeah.
And learning about that. And I'd grown up on council estates in very poor parts of the country. And I'd been in quite diverse environments because when you're poor, it doesn't care whether you're black or white or gay or disabled. You're all in the same boat, right? You don't have
Yeah.
money together. So it's quite a multicultural melting pot. And I didn't really see differences in people in that respect. I'd grown up in environments that lent itself to the multiculturalism. So I felt fairness was very important, and I saw that the recruitment industry wasn't very fair. So I think as I learned through making contacts with people like the Business Disability Forum, the Employers Network for Equality Inclusion, Stonewall, Business in the Community, there were these fringe bodies that were supporting workplace environments that were outside of the scope of recruitment, but were interesting spaces because companies were paying to get their support. And by partnering with those organizations, understanding, going to their events, going into their awards, and eventually becoming a judge of some of those awards, I immersed myself on something other than what's happening in mainstream recruitment, and was
Mm.
able to bring that experience into the world of digital online. So I think partly the milestones were then moving from the gecko, which at that time wasn't accessible to people with disabilities, understanding I was going to get stick from the market because unless I had an accessible site,
Yeah.
I wasn't doing it to be fully inclusive. I then moved to JobBoard Mount, which was by Aspen Technologies, and I then had some high levels of accessibility, then ported some screen reading tech into the business. And at that point, I started to find myself following an inclusive route as opposed to a recruitment route, able to leverage all the experience I'd had through Monster and the ladders, etc.,
Yeah.
then tapping into this new world. And what we were doing is we were bridging this space from the world of inclusion and diversity meets online job board and starting to see sales grow. So I think in the first year I did 100K, then year two, 200K. And it progressed 300, 400, 500. It was every year adding another 100K to the bottom line,
Mm.
to the point where I started to realize that the main difference of what I was doing was that in the world of the corporate being, there are individuals that are from diverse backgrounds, so, and they were forming staff network groups, so LGBT group, disability group, ethnicity group, and they were doing really cool things within their organizations. I was limited with my job board. That was all about jobs
Yeah.
and limited content. Google was changing its algorithms to be about content, and I was thinking, well, crikey, how am I just on my own and maybe with a couple of staff, how am I going to win this war of producing unique content? And staring me in the face the whole time was the fact that all these staff network groups were producing content internally that was being shared in internal staff newsletters, realizing as I was getting closer to those groups that actually I could unlock all of that content and push it through the job board and really start to connect with the audience. So if someone was looking at a job spec on what was then diversityjobs.co.uk, and they could see that that particular organization had won an award for its LGBT inclusion, or people from Black communities were thriving within that sector,
Mm.
that content was going to make the site much stickier to the user,
Yeah.
and provide a much more authentic user experience. And that's really where the journey from the transition of diversity jobs to Vercida started, was
Okay.
then starting to use content as the driver as opposed to come and get a job.
So the content, that's really quite interesting. So the content that you were delivering
Mm.
at this point, through Vercida, um, that was mainly content that was created by ERGs in your client organizations, and helping you really just magnify. I suppose it's almost helping them magnify their employer brand as a place to come to, from a diversity and inclusion perspective. Does that make sense? You were kind of almost magnifying the employer brand of your clients.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was back in sort of 2015, and at that point, we weren't really even using the term employer
Of
branding.
course. Yeah.
We were still kind of looking at ATSs and how that they would deliver jobs effectively, and Broadbeam was making great waves because it started to multi-post out to lots of different sites. So I think we were the first to start really leveraging that use of internal content to externalize it as what became the employer value proposition.
Yeah.
And that was at that moment I had that right. I'm onto something here. I was doing about 500,000 by that point. And then in 2016, I decided that right, I wanted to stop using a white label site because it wasn't built for content. I needed a platform that actually did the job that I needed it to do. So in 2016, I set about drawing up a roadmap for what then became Vercida. And I wanted to move away from purely the term diversity, because diversity jobs was sort of boxing this one area
Yes.
and actually broadening it out. And Vercida, for the listeners here, it's an acronym and it stands for values, environment, respect, culture, inclusion, diversity, and accessibility. And it encapsulated more than just diversity, because some organizations aren't very good at diversity, but they've got good values.
Yes.
Other organizations aren't very good at inclusion, but they've got a nice workplace culture. So it broadened the offering out, and it also meant, because Vercida is not a word in any language, that I could own the IP of it, trademark it, and then monitor its use globally.
Fantastic. That's really quite interesting. And the acronym as well. I had heard that a while ago, but it was good to get the reminder as well. So a lot of the time when I'm talking to job board founders, their niche is more around the skills, the job type, or even the industry. But you've obviously, for the reasons you explained earlier, gone down this niche of Vercida, we'll call it, rather than just diversity. Um, how do you how do you sell that into a client? I appreciate you've probably got long term clients that you're providing fantastic value to, but how do you go about monetizing diversity?
So the great thing about diversity is it means everybody.
Hmm.
So actually, at the point at which I was looking at the market, and there was obvious dominant players like the Monsters, the Career Builders, the Dice, the CV Libraries, the Totals, the Reads, they were all competing together against each other. And knowing that me as a small business, a one man band, I couldn't possibly compete against them. So don't bother
Hmm.
trying. Do something that exists within that space, but to the side of it. And it was a red ocean, blue ocean strategy. They were in red ocean and I wanted to be in blue ocean. And it was, how could I exist within that environment in a competitive way, but also then tap into that spend. And actually, the way that you go about selling it is understanding that there are recruitment managers on one side and then there's diversity teams on the other. And actually, you would find that often the diversity manager would be walking down the hall and they would bump into the recruitment manager, and the diversity manager, we need more diversity. And the recruitment people go, we know that, but we just don't get enough applications from those groups. And we
Yeah.
would then start to approach the diversity teams and say, look, we've got this website, it's about content, it can actually unlock the things that you are doing as a diversity professional, and then create a bridge over to the recruitment teams. And then suddenly we would get introduced to the recruitment teams that had all this noise going on, because they were being approached by job boards, by agencies, by RPOs, by ad agencies. The whole world was knocking on their door.
Yeah.
We almost got a sort of a backdoor entry in. Hey, look at Vercida, they're doing these great things on diversity and they're coming up with results. So we weren't necessarily selling the idea of diversity, because it wasn't up to us to educate organizations that diversity is a good thing for their organization.
Hmm.
It was more about showing them the way the system worked, the unique functionality that it had, because it was built to do a very specific job, but then the benefits it would have to the business and how they could see the ROI on
Yeah.
that. And it was showing them a measurable ROI, which is unfortunately what some of the diverse world has lacked. It's about actually giving them case studies and saying, look, what we've done for organizations that are similar to yours, they've achieved that because they followed this path.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I suppose obviously, job board is a two-sided marketplace, and it's great that you can bring on clients, but how do you engage or encourage or convert diverse candidates into job seekers on your platform? How do
So,
you find them? How do you target them? How do you bring them in?
so the truth of the matter is that job seekers are job seekers, right? And they are diverse because they
Hmm.
are the population at any one time. And our jobs are not unique. So the jobs that are on Vercida will be on other job boards, right?
Hmm.
The main difference is the authenticity of the user journey. So when you land on a job on Vercida, for example, and let's just say it's JP Morgan, right? And this is just a generalization. I could
Yeah.
have picked any organization. If I'm possibly a black female marketing manager and I've landed on Vercida because we've managed to get that traffic to our website through aggregators or through content or whatever, I land on the job, I immediately see it's a brand that I might have a negative association with because it might feel to me, well, this is just about white public school boys. Surely JP Morgan's about the upper echelons. Uh, am I going to fit into this type of environment? Or it might be
Yeah.
that I'm an LGBT person looking at a marketing role within a construction company or whatever the type of example you want to look at. The fact is there's psychological blockers that people have about certain brands, industries, or jobs, and that is what's led society to have a disproportionate number of people working within certain
Yeah.
organizations. But actually, when you look under the bonnet of that organization and they're doing really great things for that particular community, the problem they face is that it's the deselection of the job seeker at the moment. They're looking at a job on a job board because they don't have a look under the bonnet. They've just got a job spec, a location, and a salary, right? With Vercida, we take time, care, and energy to display the diversity information as part of the job advert. So when we aggregate the job over from the client or parse it or scrape it, whatever you want to call it, from the
Hmm.
client side to Vercida, we populate the job with lots of information about the organization from a diverse perspective. So we're talking
Okay.
about their Black network, we're talking about their returners program, menopause support, the fact they support ex-veterans in the workplace. But behind it, there are real life authentic stories of people within the organization that are unlocking that content. So it doesn't become a diversity rainbow flag or a Black Lives Matter hashtag diversity wash. It's authentic. And what we want is when the user lands on the Vercida job, they go, oh, it's JP Morgan. Do you know, I didn't realize that they had an LGBT staff network. Look at the work they're doing, the awards that they're winning on their internal Black network. So it makes an emotional connection that breaks the unconscious bias that the job seeker has. We
Got
often
it.
talk about unconscious bias from an employer point of view, but it's about breaking that mindset from a job seeker and getting them to interact with the content in a more meaningful way.
That's really, really interesting. I hadn't really thought about this concept of unconscious bias from a candidate perspective. And I suppose you're quite right. When you think about, especially, I know you gave the example of JP Morgan, but when you do think about some of the more city-based institutions, there probably is this unconscious bias that it's a bit of a, an old boys network. It's very much around you're only going to get a job there if you're privileged, etc., etc. And so I suppose that's a very, very interesting concept that I hadn't really thought about. So that's really interesting around how you convert people.
We're
Yeah.
constantly bombarded with negative
Mm.
press about this bank's doing that, or that person got the sack, or this person didn't get a job, or this community's upset. So job seekers are naturally guarded. We know that
Yes.
job seekers change the name on their CV to be more Western sounding. We know people don't disclose their hidden disabilities through fear of rejection. We know that people from LGBT communities won't come out until they feel psychologically safe. And it's about removing those barriers as early as possible
Yeah.
and making an authentic connection through content.
Interesting. Really interesting. Now, um, I wouldn't be able to interview you without talking to you about your fairly recent acquisition from Hayes. Do you want to give us the story behind that as well?
Yeah, so we were making waves within the industry, and we were working with lots and lots more companies every week and month for joining Vercida as a Vercida member, and many of those were Hayes clients. And actually, we had a conversation with them in the fact that we were working closer and closer with them in partnership. Hayes were asking us to come in and do pitches with them and give them support and advice. They were mature enough to say we're not the experts in diversity inclusion, therefore it makes sense for us to partner with an organization that has got a lot of experience on that. And really it was just through conversations internally that we said we're actually on a raise, we're looking to go for a Series A. And the conversation lent itself to, well, actually, we're in acquisition mode, and we'd be really interested in having a conversation with you about what you're doing. At that time, we'd also launched Vercida Consulting, which was a sister company that was helping organizations with things like unconscious bias training and inclusive leadership. And Hayes said, look, that we think this works really well. When our staff are asked in tenders and by our clients, what are you doing on diversity? It would really help for them to have a meaningful answer. Well, do you know what? We own the UK's largest diversity website. They've got 1 million registered candidates. They've got high disclosure rates. It means we can target specific groups if that's what you as a customer want to achieve. And owning that was a kind of a natural progression. So we went in and met the board. And they said, great, this looks fantastic. We want to buy it. So we said, okay, fine, make us an offer. And they did. They put an offer on the table on a memorandum of understanding. And for the next number of months, we've started to work on the due diligence to make that happen. And then as a result of that, we ended up selling Vercida Consulting to Hayes, and they're now embedded into that environment.
Superb. So that was just the consulting business. So the job board's still yours, and consulting is Hayes, yeah?
Yeah, so consulting's moved into Hayes. The idea was they were taking the job board as well. During that process, with obviously happening with the mini budget, it took a lot longer to do the due diligence than we had all hoped. Hayes are very heavily regulated. There's a lot of red tape in the organisation. And actually towards the back end of it, Alistair Cox, the CEO, had also then handed in his notice after, I think, 14 years, which wasn't on the roadmap. That left them without a CEO. And although we'd got the consulting arm across the line, it left the tech part in a void. And we weren't able to actually get that part of it signed off because we needed to wait for them to get a new CEO. That took quite a long time. And during that process, we licensed them the name Vercida so they could run the consulting arm because it was trademarked through the job board. And unfortunately, over that period of time, it just went on and on and on. And eventually the whole thing just kind of moved in another direction. We decided to carry on in our direction with Vercida. And then Hayes changed the name of that part of the business to a new brand. So they've gone off, and now we're free to actually run Vercida Consulting, which is quite strange because they bought a business and now we own the name of the company again, and we're free to kind of trade as Vercida Consulting. So it was just one of those anomalies in life that unfortunately didn't get past where it was meant to get. But do you know what? Things happen for a reason.
Yeah.
I own 100% of the business now, and we're back now looking for a Series A and looking at our options as to how we can grow because we've never had any investment. We've been bootstrapped since day one.
Amazing. But actually it's an interesting story because the core of that is that you created a second revenue stream, a sister company, like you said, off the back of it, and actually were able to sell that part of the business. And so it's a founder's dream, isn't it, to be able to build something and sell it and earn back some value out of all the blood, sweat and tears you put into it, but you're still able to do that and then continue with the core part of the business. So I think that's quite a success story, really, when you think about it. Like you said, going forward into another potential kind of fundraising round as well. So as we're coming kind of towards the end of this, it'd be interesting to find out, looking back over, the last 13, 14 years of your experience in building Vercida, what advice would you give to yourself if you could 13 years ago?
Well, that's an interesting question. The advice I would give myself: don't do it. No, I think really the the advice is just kind of just go with it. I mean, being an entrepreneur in in a world that is uncertain is it's like it is the roller coaster. It's one minute you're up, next minute you're down. I think it's about the advice I give myself is don't get too excited in the exciting times and don't get too down during the down times. Try and maintain a level idea of where you want to be and what you want to achieve. And try not to get too carried away with the shiny. I think consistency and steady as she goes is a good strategy to have, and don't get too carried away with the latest innovations. I mean, what drives us is we get scared that we're going to get left behind.
Hmm.
So we're always kind of running to the new thing, hoping that that's going to be the thing that's going to take us to the next level. And actually, if you build a solid business with good intentions at its core, that's what people buy into. And obviously, you've got to deliver to the client at the end of the day, and you have to stay relevant. But don't get scared of the new shiny coming along. You're always being told that this thing's going to kill a job board or that thing's going to kill an agency or AI is going to kill this. Don't worry about it. Invariably, it never happens. Stay true to your cause, and just try and enjoy what you're doing as much as possible, because otherwise you get too caught up in the stress of it, and that can have a negative effect on your well-being. And I think having us enjoying it for what it is, enjoying the learning curves of the good and the bad times, is what gives you really strong ammo to move forward when things don't go in the direction you hope that they would.
Love that. Love that. So, summarizing that is, stay as level-headed as possible, but through being level-headed, you'll probably get more enjoyment out of the process. I totally and utterly agree. So finally, you mentioned you're moving into, potential fundraising, Series A. What is, outside of that, what's next for Vercida? Any exciting plans, any new features, any kind of, big goals taking over the world? What's going on in 2025 for you?
Well, I mean, at the moment we're at 100 members, and we do around 1 million a year. I think my goal is to get to 300 members with an average order value of around 20k per client. That takes me to sort of circa 9-10 million a year.
Hmm.
And I want to achieve that within the next 3 to 4 years. So incrementally just keep growing our membership base of clients. And I think that at that point, it gives me a very profitable, healthy business with a strong acquisition
Yeah.
possibility. And then it will be most likely an exit. By that point, I'll have done it for 15, 16, 17 years. And I think at that point, it will be time to allow the business to grow beyond me. We produce a lot of data, so it'll be a very attractive acquisition for a business. Another Hayes will come along and want to
Hmm.
work with us on that. So I think really that's for me is the goal. We've introduced AI into the platform of late with our new AI agents. That's just going to become the norm
Yeah.
anyway. But it's about growing the user base, staying true to our values as a business, and enjoying the ride.
Excellent. Well, that's a fantastic note to finish on. Sounds like some exciting plans and some really hefty goals to work towards over the next few years. Morgan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks, Martin. I've enjoyed it.